Hello and welcome to Sleepsmyth, your peaceful place to unwind, dream, and drift gently into sleep. Before we start our story tonight, let me help you settle in with a simple, calming breath like a gentle lullaby for your body and mind. So, find a cozy spot, maybe snuggle under your blanket, and softly close your eyes. Now, breathing quietly through your nose for 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold that breath softly for 7 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And now, slowly exhale through your mouth for 8 seconds, letting all the tension melt away. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's do that again. Nice and easy. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. One last time, just like a soft whisper, breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Feel your body getting lighter, your mind quiet, as if you're being tucked gently into a calm, warm bed. Thank you for sharing this moment with Sleepsmyth. Now, relax completely and let the story carry you into a peaceful, restful sleep. Let's begin.
In every world, there comes a point when the quest ends, not with a trophy, not with a cutscene, but with a choice that lingers in the code of your heart. Love is never easy when the odds are stacked against you. When kingdoms crumble, monsters hunt, and survival itself becomes the battlefield. Tonight, we explore the romances that exist where the stakes are highest, where hearts take damage with every enemy strike, where devotion is not a safe dialogue option, but the final skill unlocked at the last boss fight, where allies become temporary buffs, rivals become obstacles, and every respawn carries the risk of losing the ones you cherish. Tidus and Yuna. In Spira, a world defined by cycles of death and rebirth, Tidus fights not just monsters, but time itself. Yuna must summon sacrifice after sacrifice to save her people. Every step of their journey is a countdown, a timer ticking toward loss. And yet in towns, forests, and airships, their love grows in stolen moments. A shared laugh, a dance under stars, a hand held while worlds end around them. Geralt and Yennefer. The continent is a place where destiny is written in contracts, monster bounties, and sorceress plots. Geralt is mutation incarnate, a hunter with the weight of prophecy on his shoulders. Yennefer wields magic like a blade, fierce and brilliant. Through broken memories, rivalries, and the chaos of war, they are pulled together again and again. Their love is a questline with impossible choices, side characters influencing outcomes. Yet somehow, they always find the main story leading back to each other. Ellie and Dina. In a world that has lost its respawns, Ellie and Dina fight for every heartbeat. Every scavenged item, every stealth kill, every hidden corner of the city is a checkpoint for survival. Joel's death sets a chain of side quests and main story arcs in motion. Each encounter leaves scars. And yet, amidst the ruins, they find warmth in each other's presence. Stolen moments that recharge their hearts before the next raid on the apocalypse. Some lovers meet in worlds of magic and summoning. Some collide amid chaos, betrayal, and choices written by destiny. Some cling to each other while the apocalypse devours the rest. Across every map, every battlefield, every quest log, love persists, coded deep into the narrative, impossible to cheat, impossible to ignore. 3 love stories. 3 romances where there is no safe zone, no pause menu, no undo button. Only choice, consequence, and the courage to stay connected when the world tells you to give up. Tonight, settle in. Let the monsters of memory and loss fade. Let the maps of magic, chaos, and apocalypse unfold. Let the lore of these worlds guide you. And watch as love becomes the final quest, the ultimate risk, the last thing left to lose. In Borrowed Light, a lovelore of Tidus and Yuna, a narration drawn from Final Fantasy X, a tale of love fleeting as sunrise on a dying world, where every heartbeat counted against eternity. Stranger beneath the falling sky. Under the blinding lights of Xanarkand, Tidus was untouchable. The star of the Blitzball arena, adored by thousands, his name echoing across the floating city like a hymn to youth and glory. The air shimmered with holograms, music, and the rush of celebration. And yet beneath that brilliance there was something hollow. A boy running from the shadow of a father he could never please, playing games so he wouldn't have to think about being alone. Then the sky broke. A wave of impossible light tore across the skyline, swallowing towers and sound alike. And from it emerged the vast, unknowable shape of Sin, a creature that looked like grief made real, its body rippling with storms older than time. Tidus watched in disbelief as his city fell into ruin. The cheers turned to screams, the world twisting into fragments of memory. And through that chaos, he saw a man he thought he hated, Jekt, beckoning him toward the impossible. The next moment, he was falling through an ocean that wasn't water, tumbling through a current of dreams and time. When he opened his eyes, the world was new, ancient, quiet, and full of prayers. No more neon lights, no hum of machines, just waves brushing against white sand, and skies too wide to belong to any city he knew. He met a stranger named Waka, who spoke of Yevon and Sin as if they were gods and curses in the same breath. The world was called Spira, and its people lived knowing that Sin would come again, and again, in an endless cycle of death and repentance. Tidus didn't understand any of it. All he wanted was to go home, but home no longer existed. He joined Waka's team, the Besaid Aurochs, thinking it might lead him somewhere, anywhere familiar, and that's when he saw her for the first time. Yuna. She stood on the pier, sunlight glinting off her staff, her mismatched eyes lifting toward the sea as if listening to something unseen. A young summoner, barely older than he was, smiling with the serenity of someone who had already accepted her fate. When she spoke, her voice carried the stillness of prayer and the warmth of the sun that touched the ocean's skin. Tidus didn't know her yet, but something in that smile felt like an answer to a question he hadn't realized he was asking. She was preparing to leave on her pilgrimage, a sacred journey to defeat sin, to bring a brief peace called the calm to her people. It was a cycle that had repeated for 1,000 years. Every summoner who brought the calm also gave their life to make it happen. But Tidus, who didn't understand the rules of this world, saw only a girl with courage shining through the weight of tradition. And so when Yuna offered him a place among her guardians, to walk beside her to protect her, he accepted. Not out of faith, but instinct. Something in him, dream or not, was drawn to her light. As their ship left the island, Spira unfolded before them. Cities half sunk in water, temples where prayers became magic, deserts where machines rusted beneath forbidden suns. Tidus didn't yet know that he was part of a story written long before his birth, that he was both savior and illusion, destined to vanish when the world woke again. For now, all he knew was this: somewhere between the fall of one world and the dawn of another, he had found someone worth believing in. And the sky above, vast, foreign, endless, carried their story into its quiet blue, as if the gods themselves were listening. Pilgrimage of prayer and laughter. Morning came soft and golden over the island of Besed. The sea shimmered like glass, and the air carried the smell of salt and fruit. Yuna stood before the temple, her staff held close, her prayer quiet and sure. She had just completed her first trial as a summoner, calling forth Veilfor, her first Aeon, a being of light born from her devotion. Tidus watched, spellbound, as the creature descended from the sky, wings unfurling, luminous and alive. For him, who came from a city of science and sport, it was the first miracle he'd ever seen. When Yuna turned to smile at him, tired but radiant, he felt something stir, not the awe of seeing magic, but the warmth of seeing someone brave enough to wield it for others. Their journey began soon after. Yuna traveled with her guardians, Lulu, the black mage whose words could cut like ice, Waka, steadfast and devout, Kamari, the silent Ronso, and Tidus, the newcomer who didn't understand the weight of their pilgrimage yet. They journeyed across Spira's endless paths, from the tropical calm of Kalika, where they prayed for the souls of the drowned, to the city of Luca, where the blitzball tournament roared with life. In Luca, laughter returned to Yuna's face. Tidus taught her how to cheer, how to shout, how to forget the duty that pressed against her every breath. For a moment, they were just two young people in a crowd, laughing under sunlight that felt almost eternal. But even here, the world reminded them of its sorrow. Sin struck again, turning celebration into chaos. The monster's arrival left the sea burning and the sky broken, reminding them all why their pilgrimage existed at all. Still, after the battle, Yuna smiled at Tidus and said softly, "You're a good guardian." He wanted to tell her he wasn't, that he was lost, that he didn't even know what a summoner's journey truly meant. But he couldn't, because when she looked at him like that, he felt for the first time like he belonged somewhere. They sailed from Lucca to the Joe's temple, where thunder rolled endlessly over stone and lightning split the sky. Tidus followed Yuna into temples, stood beside her as she prayed, and learned the rhythm of her faith. Each Aeon she gained was another step toward the end, though he didn't yet know what that end meant. At night, by the campfires, the guardians would share stories, fragments of the past stitched together like fading stars. Tidus would tell tales of Xanakan's bright towers and cheering crowds, and Yuna would listen as if she could see it all through his eyes. Sometimes she would laugh, softly, kindly, and he realized she wasn't laughing at him but for him, for the boy who still believed in things like forever. There was one night by the moonflow when fireflies drifted above the water, glowing like spirits. Tidus asked why the people sent them into the air. Lulu told him they were fireflies, the souls of the dead, and Yuna quietly whispered the sending, a ritual that guided those souls to the far plain. Tidus watched as her dance filled the river with light, each movement slow and reverent. It was beautiful and unbearably sad. He began to understand that Yuna lived every moment knowing how fragile it was, that every prayer, every smile, was a defiance against the end waiting for her. Still, he found ways to make her laugh. He told her she was too serious, teased her until her calm composure broke into genuine laughter, a sound that carried through the trees like a promise. And in that laughter, Spira felt less cursed, the road less heavy. It was a pilgrimage of prayer, yes, but also of laughter, of fleeting joys between temples and battles. Tidus didn't yet realize that love was already walking beside him, that it was growing in every shared glance, in every sunset they watched without needing to speak. And somewhere deep inside, though he didn't yet have words for it, Tidus began to understand that this world, this girl, was becoming home. Secrets carried by the calm lands. The calm lands stretched before them like an ocean of grass, rippling beneath a pale sky. The wind there carried both peace and sorrow. It was the place where summoners of the past had fought their final battles, and where countless guardians had laid down their lives beside them. To the people of Spira, it was sacred ground. To Tidus, it was simply quiet, too quiet for a boy raised in a city that never slept. They had come far, past the thunder plains where Yuna laughed through fear as lightning crashed around them, past the frozen glow of Macalania woods where the trees shimmered like crystal under blue light. Tidus had begun to see how each step on this journey brought them closer to something final. But still, Yuna smiled as if there was no ending waiting at all. In Macalania, they found a moment stolen from fate. The air was cold, the lake mirrored the stars, and for once, the world seemed to hold its breath. Yuna stood at the water's edge, her reflection trembling across its surface. Tidus told her she was trying too hard to carry everything alone, and she laughed, that same small warm sound that always cut through his confusion. She confessed then softly that she envied his courage, his way of facing the unknown without fear. He told her it wasn't courage, only foolishness, and she smiled in that way that made him forget the word farewell. When he realized what her pilgrimage truly meant, that defeating sin would mean her death, it broke something inside him. It wasn't fair. He wanted to shout, to stop it, to drag her away from temples and gods and destiny. But she just shook her head gently, saying that she chose this path, that her life had always belonged to Spira. That night, by the shimmering lake, love stopped being an unspoken thing between them. It became real, fragile, desperate, but real. They laughed, loudly, helplessly, to drown out the pain of it all, their laughter echoing through the glassy stillness until it sounded almost like joy. In that laughter, Yuna found the courage to be human, just for a while. And Tidus, who had never believed in faith, found something worth believing in after all. But the calm lands had secrets of their own. In the distance, beyond the wind, loomed Mount Gagazet, the threshold of the summoner's last trial, guarded by the proud Ronso tribes. Each step beyond that mountain would bring them closer to Zanarkand, a city Tidus thought he knew, but which in this world was only ruins and memory. On the eve of their crossing, they rested on the plain, the stars above scattered like fragments of the Fates' dreams. Lulu and Waka spoke of the summoners they had guarded before, names now lost to time. Tidus listened in silence, realizing how many had walked this same road and never returned. He turned to Yuna and asked quietly, "What happens after you beat sin?" She looked at him, her eyes shimmering with the reflection of the firelight, and said, "I don't know. Maybe peace. Maybe nothing." It wasn't meant to sound cruel, only true. And that truth felt heavier than any storm they had faced. Still, as dawn touched the horizon, painting the calm lands gold, Yuna smiled at him again, a smile that pretended tomorrow was still theirs to reach. Tidus didn't tell her that her smile scared him more than any monster ever could. They walked side by side toward the mountains, the wind tugging at their clothes, carrying whispers of every summoner who had come before. Yuna's steps were steady, Tidus's uncertain, but somehow they matched pace perfectly. Somewhere between prayer and denial, between love and duty, they had become something more than guardian and summoner. And though neither dared to name it yet, both knew their journey was no longer about saving the world. It was about saving each other. The Dream and the Summoner. Snow fell over the mountain pass like falling feathers, soft, endless, silent. The summit of Mount Gagazet loomed ahead, sacred ground, where summoners proved their resolve before facing the final Aeon. The Ronso guardians stood watch, proud and solemn, their eyes full of understanding and pity all at once. They knew what awaited Yuna beyond those peaks. For Tidus, the mountain felt like another world entirely, the air thin and biting, the silence heavy with memory. Every footstep crunched into snow that had seen too many goodbyes. He wanted to ask Yuna to turn back, to choose another way, but he couldn't. He had already seen it in her face. Her decision was made long before he ever arrived in her story. As they climbed, Yuna's guardians began to falter, not from exhaustion, but from the truth pressing down upon them. Lulu's voice, once sharp and unwavering, grew quiet. Waka's faith began to crack under doubt. Even Kamari, silent and strong, turned his gaze away. And Tidus, who had once thought himself brave, realized that courage meant something different here. It meant walking toward your own end without flinching. When they reached the summit, the Ronso let them pass with solemn nods. Beyond lay the cold winds of Zanarkand, not the city Tidus remembered, but a graveyard of stone and silence. The ruins stood like bones under the aurora, the air filled with fireflies that drifted between the fallen towers. It was his home, and yet not, a reflection carved from memory, a dream given weight. There they met Lady Yunalesca, the first summoner to have defeated Sin 1,000 years ago, now an immortal guardian of the cycle. Her beauty was ghostly, her voice gentle as she spoke of sacrifice, of how each summoner must choose one they love to become their final Aeon, fusing their souls in death to bring the calm. Yuna listened, her hands trembling around her staff, and Tidus finally understood the cruelty of this world's peace. He refused to accept it. "There's gotta be another way," he shouted, voice breaking in the still air. But Yunalesca only smiled, sorrowful, as if she had heard those same words 1,000 times before. When she asked if Yuna had chosen her final Aeon, Tidus stepped forward without thinking, ready to offer himself if it would save her. But she shook her head, tears in her eyes. "I won't let anyone die for me," she said softly. "Not anymore." In that moment, love became rebellion. They fought Yunalesca together, the living against the promise of eternal death, and when the battle was done, the illusion shattered. For the first time in 1,000 years, the cycle broke. But as the ruins fell silent again, another truth waited in the quiet. Tidus turned to Yuna, his breath clouding in the cold, and asked about Zanarkand, her Zanarkand. She told him gently that his home, the bright city of lights and games, had been destroyed 1,000 years ago, that the Zanarkand he came from was a dream conjured by the fate, spirits who slept and dreamed to sustain the illusion of that world. He wasn't real. The truth struck like lightning, no blood, no wound, but everything inside him trembled. He was a dream of the dead, shaped by their longing, walking the earth for reasons he barely understood. He looked at his hands, at the warmth still there, and wondered how something imagined could feel so alive. He looked at Yuna, and wondered how something not real could love so much. She didn't cry, not then. She only stepped closer, touching his face as if to prove he was still there. "You're here now," she whispered, "and that's enough." For the first time, Tidus understood that love wasn't about forever. It was about the brief moment when two souls met, even if one was made of dream and the other of prayer. As night fell over Zanarkand's ruins, the stars above flickered like dying embers. Tidus lay awake, listening to Yuna's steady breathing beside him, trying to memorize the rhythm of it, because he knew now that every second they had left was borrowed from something that could not last. And though the world around them was built from dreams, the way she looked at him, soft, certain, unafraid, made it all feel real. Song of the Fate. They descended from the mountain into a world unraveling. The calm land stretched out before them, a horizon of quiet wind and empty sky. Once this place had seen laughter and pilgrimage. Now it lay hushed, waiting for something to end. Yuna walked ahead, her staff glinting faintly under the pale sun, and Tidus followed a few paces behind, watching how the breeze lifted her hair like strands of gold. He wanted to speak, to tell her he wasn't afraid anymore, but the words tangled in his throat like prayer. Everywhere they went, the fate began to stir. Statues in temples, silent for centuries, now spoke in dreams and fragments. They called to Tidus, voices overlapping, soft as tides. The end is near, our dream will fade. He tried to ignore them, tried to believe there could be a future beyond endings. But each time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes, the ruins of Xanarkand sinking beneath the waves, the fates sleeping eternally, their dreams unraveling, and Yuna standing alone at the edge of it all. When they reached Bevel, the city of the church, they were met not with welcome but with guns and sermons. The faith that had once promised salvation had become a cage, one Yuna shattered with her quiet defiance. She spoke before the people, voice trembling but resolute, declaring that the pilgrimage was built on lies, that sin's defeat through sacrifice only chained the world to sorrow again and again. Gasps filled the air, followed by silence, and then one by one, her guardians stood beside her. Kamari, Waka, Lulu, Riku, Orin, and Tidus, who stood not as a savior or dream, but as someone who believed in her more than anything that had ever been real. They fled Bevel as the towers burned behind them. From there, their path turned toward the sea, toward sin itself. The fate in Tidus's mind sang louder now, their chorus like a tide rising inside his skull. He began to understand, to end the cycle, sin had to be destroyed completely, and the fate who dreamed him would have to fade. One night, as they rested by the ocean, Tidus sat alone by the shore, the stars reflecting on the dark water like 1,000 tiny fate eyes watching him. Yuna approached, the hem of her kimono trailing through the sand, and sat beside him. "They said you might disappear," she whispered, her voice trembling only slightly. "If we defeat sin for good, if the fates stop dreaming." He didn't answer at first. He just watched the waves curl and break, each one erasing what came before it. Finally, he said, "Then I'll be with them. But you'll live. You'll really live." She shook her head, eyes shining. "No, you'll be with me. Always." He smiled then, that same bright, foolish grin he had worn when they first met. But his eyes gave him away. They were full of sadness and wonder all at once. At dawn, the Fates' song echoed across the sea, a hymn of endings. The sky turned silver, the water shimmered, and somewhere deep beneath the waves, sin stirred. Their ship cut through the mist toward the great creature, scales like mountains, breath like thunder. Yuna stood at the bow, staff raised high, and Tidus beside her, blade gleaming with borrowed sunlight. The battle that followed was less a fight and more a farewell. Eons, her companions, her guardians made of prayer, turned against her, one by one, their voices whispering gratitude as they vanished into light. Valefor, Ifrit, Shiva, Bahamut, all dissolved into fireflies, returning to the dream that birthed them. Yuna wept for each one, and Tidus held her when she faltered, though his own hands trembled with the truth that he too was fading. When the last Aeon fell, silence followed, the kind of silence that feels eternal. Then through that stillness came the final hymn, the song of the fate, not mournful but gentle like the sigh of an ending dream. Tidus felt it in his chest, the pull, the unraveling, the soft thread that tethered him to this world coming undone. He looked at Yuna, memorizing her face, her breath, her heartbeat against his. "Just a little longer," he said, voice breaking. She nodded, even though she knew they had no time left. And still they stood together side by side as the light rose around them, not as a summoner and her dream, but as two souls who had found each other in the middle of eternity and decided to love anyway. When the world remembered us. Morning rose over Spira like the first breath after centuries of drowning. The sky stretched wide and blue, unbroken for the first time since memory began. No hymns, no cries, no rumble of sin in the distance. Only wind, only waves, only life. On the deck of the airship, Yuna stood with her guardians, her staff lowered, her eyes searching the horizon where the monster had fallen. The sea was calm now, endless and shimmering, carrying pieces of light that drifted upward, fireflies, scattering like seeds of memory into the sky. Each one a farewell, a prayer, a dream undone. Tidus stood beside her, but the light was already fading around his hands. He could feel the edges of himself softening, the air sliding through his fingers like he was no longer made of solid things. Every heartbeat was a little lighter than the one before. Below them, the world began to stir. Villages emerging from fear, bells ringing for the first time in generations, laughter returning to the wind. Children ran through fields that had once been battlefields. Old men looked to the horizon and wept because the sound of waves no longer carried terror. This was the calm, not the false peace bought with sacrifice, but the true quiet earned through defiance, through love. But Tidus knew he couldn't stay to see it. He turned to Yuna, who was still watching the ocean as if waiting for something, or someone, to return from it. Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first, only the shape of a word he couldn't quite hear. Then she looked at him, and he saw that she already knew. The Fate song still lingered faintly in the air, a hum beneath the heartbeat of the world, and through it he heard them whisper, "It's time to rest." "Don't," she said suddenly, her voice breaking for the first time since Zanarkand. "Don't go. Please." He smiled, that same easy grin he'd worn when he first splashed into her story. "I have to. The Fate can't keep dreaming forever." She shook her head, tears spilling fast now. "Then I'll find you again. I'll dream of you too." He reached out, touching her cheek, though even that was growing harder, his fingers passing through her hair like mist. "You already did," he whispered. The others turned away, giving them the only kind of mercy they could, silence. The fireflies rose higher now, wrapping the ship in silver light. Tidus stepped back, feeling himself dissolve into that same glow. Every part of him wanted to stay, to keep her hand in his, to anchor himself to her heartbeat. But the pull of the dream was stronger, a tide that could not be resisted. He took one last step forward, drawing her into an embrace, and for a moment it was real again. Her warmth, his breath, the scent of the ocean in her hair. Everything that mattered condensed into that single heartbeat between them. Then he let go. Yuna reached for him, but her hands found only air. He smiled once more, wide, bright, a little sad, and then he dove backward off the edge of the ship into the light below. He didn't fall, he soared. The sky opened before him, and the world he had borrowed began to close behind. Below, Yuna's voice rose, carried by the wind, "I love you." He turned midair, wanting to say it back, but no sound came, only a smile, only the echo of what they already knew. And then he was gone. The light scattered, the song faded. On the deck, Yuna stood still, tears tracing her cheeks as the wind played with her hair. Around her, the world was reborn, birds circling the sky, waves calm and golden beneath the sun. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, not for the dead, not for the fate, but for the dream that had saved her world and taught her how to love it. That night, across Spira, the people celebrated, fireworks over Luca, songs by the temple steps, laughter returning to homes long empty. And though Yuna smiled for them, her gaze kept drifting to the stars, to the far horizon where light still shimmered faintly. For everyone else, it was the beginning of peace. For her, it was the memory of a boy who had never truly been, but had loved her more fiercely than anyone real ever could. And in the wind, just for a moment, she thought she heard him laugh, that bright, reckless laugh that once filled her heart with hope. The calm without you. Silence became the sound of the new world. For the first time in centuries, Spira woke to mornings without prayer, without fear, without the shadow of sin upon the sea. Yet for Yuna, the quiet was deafening. Everywhere she went, people called her name with reverence. Lady Yuna, the high summoner who ended the cycle, who freed the fate, who saved them all. They brought her flowers, offer her blessings, asked her to speak of victory, and she smiled, bowed, and said words she barely heard herself saying. Because every celebration, every song, every burst of laughter reminded her of the one voice missing from it all. Tidus had vanished with the fate, the dream fading with the dawn he'd fought to bring her. But Yuna couldn't believe he was truly gone. She carried his memory like a pulse in her chest, something unseen but constant, beating in rhythm with her steps. In Luca, she stood on the balcony of the stadium where blitzballs once soared, where Tidus's laughter once echoed through the crowds. The ocean spread before her, calm, radiant, infinite, but it felt too still, too empty. She used to think peace was what she wanted most. Now, she realized peace without him was only another kind of loneliness. Days turned into months. Spira rebuilt. Temples reopened not as places of worship, but of learning. Machines, once forbidden, returned to use. Pilgrimages ceased, replaced by exploration. The world Tidus had dreamed of, one where people lived without fear, had finally come to life. But Yuna could not rest. At night she dreamed of him, not the way he'd looked at the end, fading into light, but the way he'd been beside her, loud, clumsy, radiant with joy. She'd wake with the sound of his laughter in her ears and reach for the air beside her, half expecting to find him there. One evening, she stood on Besed's shore, the same place where her journey had begun, the same stretch of sand where she'd first seen him smile under the sun. The tide washed over her feet, warm and endless, and she closed her eyes. "Maybe you're still out there," she whispered. "Maybe you're part of the waves now." Behind her, Waka's voice called, soft with concern. "Yuna, you okay?" She turned and smiled. "I'm fine." But when he left, she stayed, watching the horizon until night fell, stars blooming one by one like fireflies above the water. She imagined them as fragments of his dream, scattered but still shining, watching over her from somewhere beyond the veil. When she traveled across Spira, people asked her to tell the story of how she had defeated sin. She told them everything, except for him. Tidus became her secret legend, a love too personal for sermons or memory spheres. She carried him quietly, like a prayer she couldn't let the world dilute. Oren's words often returned to her, "This is your story." But now she understood, it had always been their story. His laughter had been the spark that made her question fate. His faith had given her courage to rewrite destiny. And though the world remembered Yuna as the one who brought the eternal calm, she remembered it differently. She had simply followed a boy who dreamed of a better ending. Sometimes, when the wind was right, she thought she heard that laugh again, fleeting, mischievous, carried between the waves. And in those moments, she would close her eyes, let the ocean breeze brush her face, and smile. Because though the fate had stopped dreaming, she never had. In every heart that still believed in love beyond endings, Tidus lived on, not as a memory, but as a promise. And as the world healed, Yuna began to wonder if that promise was calling to her, somewhere across the horizon, waiting to be found again. Return to the dream. 2 years passed beneath Spira's golden skies. Peace endured, yet Yuna's heart remained restless, drawn to something just beyond the horizon. The world was moving forward, rebuilding, changing, discovering joy again, but she still lingered in yesterday's light, searching for the warmth of a boy who had faded with the dawn. One evening, in the rebuilt city of Luca, someone brought her a sphere, a relic from the ruins of Zanarkand. The image within flickered with static, but as the haze cleared, she saw a figure running through a dim corridor, laughing in that familiar, reckless way. For a heartbeat, she couldn't breathe. It was Tidus, or someone who looked impossibly like him. The sphere was a dream captured in motion, a fragment of something lost but not gone. Yuna's fingers trembled as she held it, the glow painting her skin with memory. And for the first time since he'd vanished, she felt hope not as a wound, but as a call. So she left beset again. She traded her summoner's robes for light gear, her staff for twin pistols, relics of a changing age. No longer a priestess of sacrifice, she became a seeker of truth, following every rumor, every sphere that might lead her back to him. She traveled with Riku and Pain aboard the Celsius, gliding through the sky like a dream unbound. Together, they uncovered memories buried in ruins, stories of 1,000-year war, of lovers divided by fate, of ghosts who refused to be forgotten. Each discovery drew Yuna deeper into a world reborn from fragments of the old one, a world that was learning, as she was, how to love again after loss. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she would stand on the ship's deck and watch the clouds roll beneath her. The stars shimmered like fireflies, and she'd whisper into the wind, "If you can hear me, I'm coming." Her journey led her to the far plane, the realm of the dead, where souls lingered in light. There, she found truth and illusion intertwined. The boy she had seen in the sphere was not Tidus, but Shuin, an echo of the past, a shadow of pain wearing a familiar face. Yet through his tragedy, Yuna understood something deeper. Love, even when lost, leaves an imprint strong enough to cross worlds. When the battle for Spira's future ended, and the sky cleared once again, Yuna stood alone by the ocean. The fate had promised her once that if she kept dreaming, if she kept believing, perhaps the boy she loved would return. And one day, on that same beach in Besed, where the waves met the morning light, the sea stirred. Fireflies gathered, swirling in a golden dance, and from the water rose a familiar silhouette. He was there, smiling, real. For a moment, neither moved. Then Yuna ran to him, laughter and tears tangled in her breath. She leapt into his arms, and the world seemed to hold its breath. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. Every word they had ever said, every goodbye, every prayer had led here. The sea shimmered around them, and somewhere far away the Fates slept, still dreaming but at peace. Some say it was only her imagination, a dream made flesh by hope. Others say it was the Fates' final gift, a miracle woven from love's memory. Yuna never questioned it. She only knew that in that moment, he was there, warm, alive, laughing as he always had. The world went on around them, rebuilt cities, new stories, old faiths fading into legend. But for her, this was enough. She had found him again. And if tomorrow he vanished once more, she would still be grateful, because once upon a time, in a world built on prayer and dream, they had chosen each other against all reason, and loved until even the stars remembered their names. As dusk settled over the sea, Yuna whispered into the breeze, "This is our story." And somewhere beyond time, a voice answered, bright, familiar, and free, "Yes, it's ours." Of chaos and magic, a lovelore of Geralt of Rivia and Yennefer of Vengerberg, a narration drawn from the Witcher saga, a tale where love was both wound and salve, where destiny bound two souls across lifetimes through war, memory, and the price of power itself. A wish in rind. In a world where monsters outnumber miracles, destiny has a strange sense of humor. It begins not with a prophecy, but with a headache, a spell gone wrong, and a witcher who only wanted a moment's peace. Rind was an unremarkable town, all crooked roofs and cobbled streets slick with rain. Geralt of Rivia arrived there on weary feet, his silver sword wrapped and hidden, his yellow eyes dulled by exhaustion. He was no hero, only a man shaped by alchemy and solitude, hunting creatures for coin. But fate, as it often does, was already waiting for him. The trouble started with a djinn, a spirit of air, caught in a bottle and raging for freedom. Geralt and his bard companion Dandelion had fished it from a lake without knowing what it was. Dandelion, being Dandelion, wished carelessly and nearly paid with his life. The Witcher, desperate to save his friend, sought the only person in town powerful enough to help, a sorceress named Yennefer of Vengerberg. She was not what he expected. Yennefer was all sharp angles and velvet voice, beauty threaded through danger. Her violet eyes glimmered with secrets, her power like lightning under silk. To most she was distant, cruel even, but Geralt saw something else beneath the armor of perfume and pride. A woman aching to be more than what magic had made her. Their meeting was chaos from the start. She agreed to heal Dandelion, but only if Geralt allowed her to use the djinn's power for herself. She longed for the one thing her magic could not give her, fertility, the chance to bear a child. Geralt should have refused, but he didn't. There was something in her that drew him, the same dangerous gravity that pulls a moth to flame. That night, Rind became a tempest. The djinn broke free, furious at its enslavement. Spells tore through the air, windows shattered, and the sky itself seemed to scream. In the midst of it all, Geralt and Yennefer fought side by side, two storms colliding. He tried to stop her before the spirit consumed her, but it was too late. The only way to save her life was to make a final wish, one that would forever bind his fate to hers. What did he wish for? No one knows. Some say he wished that their fates be intertwined, that they could never truly be apart. Others believe he simply wished for her to live. But whatever the words, the meaning was clear. Destiny took notice. When the storm finally fell silent, Rind lay in ruins, and in the center of the wreckage stood the Witcher and the sorceress, alive, trembling, bound by something neither could name. Yennefer looked at him with fury and wonder, her lips curved into a smile that could kill. "Be careful what you wish for, Witcher," she whispered. And from that night onward, he never quite escaped her, nor she him. For in a single wish, a love was born, fierce, imperfect, and destined to outlive every spell ever cast. Fire and frost. There are loves that smolder quietly, and then there are those that burn the world just to stay warm. Geralt and Yennefer belonged to the latter. After Rind, their fates wound together like twin threads of silver and smoke. They traveled for a time, a Witcher and a sorceress, hunter and storm, bound not by vows, but by a strange rhythm only they could hear. She was mercurial, proud, intoxicating. He was stubborn, stoic, maddeningly calm in the face of her fire. Together they were impossible, and yet inevitable. They hunted monsters, dined in courts, slept in ruined towers beneath starlit skies. Between them existed a kind of fragile balance, her chaos against his stillness, her ambition against his quiet heart. She would mock his simplicity, and he would tease her vanity. But beneath the sharp words was something unspoken, a tenderness neither dared name aloud. For all her cunning and power, Yennefer feared one thing above all, her own emptiness. Magic had made her beautiful, perfect even, but it had also taken from her the ability to bear children. To her, it was the cruelest curse, a constant reminder that her power came at the cost of the one thing she could never create. Geralt understood the ache, though he could never say it. His own body was sterile, a witcher's fate, a side effect of the alchemy that made him what he was. In that shared loss, they mirrored one another. But mirrors can break easily. Their love was a pendulum, swinging from passion to fury without warning. One moment they were inseparable, and the next she was gone, leaving only the scent of lilac and gooseberries in her wake. Geralt never chased her. He had learned that chasing Yennefer was like trying to catch the wind. And yet she always returned, as if drawn back to the gravity of his silence, to the way he looked at her without fear. There were others, faces that passed through Geralt's life when the world grew too cold. Shunny, kind and steadfast. Triss Merigold, Yennefer's friend and for a time, her rival. Keira Metz, clever and dangerous. They each offered comfort, a semblance of peace. But none could quiet the part of him that still turned whenever he caught a trace of violet eyes or heard her laughter carried by the wind. Their reunions were like the breaking of storms, sudden, wild, and unrelenting. They would fight until words became weapons, then fall into each other's arms as if the argument itself was foreplay to forgiveness. To love Yennefer was to live on the edge of ruin, but Geralt had long made peace with ruin. Still, love forged in battle often leaves scars, and beneath all the fire and frost, there was something else, a shadow of doubt, small but growing. Was their bond truly love? Or was it just the djinn's wish pulling them together, again and again, like a cruel joke of fate? Neither dared to ask aloud. Not yet. So they carried on, two souls burning through the world, their love both blessing and burden, their laughter echoing between wars and wilderness. Wherever Geralt went, her memory followed like a phantom flame. And when Yennefer cast her spells, she could almost feel him in the quiet that followed, that heavy, grounding stillness that reminded her she wasn't alone, no matter how far she ran. In time, they would learn the truth of their bond. But for now, fire and frost danced in fragile truce, and destiny, amused and patient, watched from afar. Djinns and dissonance. Years passed as they always did for a witcher, in fragments. Long stretches of silence broken by sudden violence, old scars reopening in places he had forgotten to guard. Geralt of Rivia wandered, hunted, healed, and hurt, as Yennefer's absence trailed behind him like a forgotten song. He had begun to wonder if their love had been real, or if it was all a trick of the djinn, an illusion spun from chaos and words spoken in desperation. His wish in rind had bound them, yes, but perhaps not by choice. Perhaps fate had stolen that from them too. So when he met Yennefer again, years later, it was as if time folded in on itself. She was the same, proud, sharp, untouchable, and yet softer in the edges, though she'd never admit it. He found her in the company of kings and intrigues, a sorceress at the heart of tangled politics, playing her endless game of survival and control. Their reunion was not gentle. It never was. "What are you doing here, Witcher?" she asked, voice like silk over steel. "Looking for answers," he said, though they both knew he wasn't talking about the quest that brought him to her door. The air between them was heavy with memory, every word a spark waiting to ignite the past. Geralt confessed what haunted him, that he feared their bond was not love but sorcery's residue. Yennefer's eyes flickered, something wounded, something furious. And so, for once, they decided to face it. Together. They sought the Djinn again, the same type of being that had tied their fates once before. They would find another, summon it, and undo the wish, to see if what remained was real. The journey was long and perilous. Across mountains and rivers, through war-torn lands, they traveled not as lovers but as strangers relearning each other's silences. At night, Yennefer would stare into the fire, her expression caught between fear and longing. Geralt said little as always, but every time he looked at her, the thought struck like a blade. What if she was only ever here because of that one foolish wish? When at last they captured the Djinn, the air grew thick and charged, wind howling, earth trembling beneath their feet. Yennefer raised her arms, channeling the spell that would release them both. The Djinn screamed, writhing in fury as magic surged around them like a living storm. Geralt reached for her, afraid she'd be torn apart again, and in that instant, the bond shattered, and nothing changed. The magic was gone, the wish undone. Yet still she looked at him the same way she always had, half love, half exasperation, as if he were both the best and worst thing that had ever happened to her. Geralt, for all his stoic restraint, laughed softly. "So it wasn't fate," he said. "Not this time." Yennefer smiled, a real one, rare as sunlight on the path. "No," she said quietly, "just us." It was not a grand revelation, no song-worthy moment of triumph, just a quiet truth that felt heavier than any curse. They had been bound by magic once, yes, but what tethered them now was something far more dangerous: choice. After that night, the wind calmed. The world felt quieter somehow, and though they parted again, as they always did, both carried a different kind of peace, the knowledge that their love, for all its ruin and rage, was real. Destiny had not made them. They had made themselves. And for two souls long trapped by fate's design, that was the rarest magic of all. The child of surprise. Destiny, it seemed, was never done with Geralt of Rivia. He had tried to defy it, to walk the world as nothing more than a man with two swords and too many regrets. But fate, ever patient, waited for the right moment to remind him that no one truly escapes its grasp, not even a witcher. It began, as many things do in his life, with a debt, a life owed for a life spared. Years earlier, Geralt had invoked the law of surprise, that old and sacred custom where one claims as reward that which the debtor already has, but does not yet know. He had not meant for it to matter. It was a joke, a throwaway choice after saving a man named Duny from certain death. But the law, like destiny, has a way of remembering promises. That promise's name was Cirilla Fiona Elin Rhiannon, Ciri, the lion cub of Cintra. Geralt met her first as a child, a girl with eyes like spring leaves and a spirit too wild for the royal court. She was Princess of Cintra, granddaughter to Queen Calanthe, but she was also something more, a child of prophecy, destined to change the world. When fate finally brought them together again years later, the Witcher understood what the law had truly meant. This was not payment. It was purpose. Yennefer entered Ciri's story soon after, drawn not by duty, but by love's strange gravity. She saw in the girl what she herself had lost long ago, the possibility of motherhood, of nurturing something pure in a life long ruled by ambition and war. Ciri adored her, that fierce, brilliant woman who smelled of lilac and gooseberries, whose touch could set the air humming with magic. And so the three of them formed something the world had never intended, a family, stitched together not by blood, but by choice and fate alike. Geralt, ever the protector, taught Ciri to fight, to survive the road's cruelty. Yennefer taught her control, how to shape chaos instead of being consumed by it. Between them, the girl learned more than swordplay and sorcery. She learned compassion, strength, the weight of love in a world that punished it. But even as they built something beautiful, dangers circled like vultures. The continent was changing, kingdoms falling to Nilfgaard's black banners, mages conspiring in secret councils, monsters born from war's ashes. Ciri, with her elder blood and her untamed gift, became the most hunted soul alive. Geralt and Yennefer became her guardians, her parents, in all but name. They stood between her and the world's greed, facing empires, assassins, and ancient powers who wanted to twist the child's destiny to their will. Together, they became more than lovers. They became home. And yet, even love born of purpose must bend under pressure. Yennefer's hunger for control clashed with Geralt's quiet protectiveness. She saw the bigger picture, the wars, the politics, the necessity of power, while he saw only the girl who called him father and the need to keep her safe. But through every argument, through every near loss, there remained that unshakable truth. They loved Ciri, and through her, they learned how to love each other differently. Less as a fever and more as faith. Ciri was the child neither could have, and the proof that destiny's cruelty could still bear something kind. When the storms came again, and they always did, it was Ciri who would carry their legacy forward. But for a time, amid fire and fear, they had something that resembled peace. A witcher, a sorceress, and a child of surprise. Three souls defying the world simply by choosing to be a family. And for a fleeting moment, destiny smiled. Between monsters and men, the world had begun to rot from the inside. You could smell it in the air, blood and smoke, empire and greed. The continent was breaking apart, and so too were those who once believed they could outrun its ruin. War rolled like thunder between kingdoms. Nilfgaard's black sun rose higher each day, swallowing thrones and villages alike. Monsters thrived in the wreckage, born from hatred and magic gone wrong. And through it all, Geralt and Yennefer found themselves, once again, on opposite sides of the same storm. Ciri was lost to them, torn away by chaos and fate. Each believed the other would find her first. Each believed the other had failed. And so began their longest separation. Geralt wandered the war-torn paths of Temeria and Redania, the weight of his swords heavier than ever. He took contracts to keep moving, drowners in the swamps, wyverns in the hills, men worse than either. For a witcher, there was always work in a world falling apart. But for Geralt, there was no peace in killing. Every battle, every coin earned, was a distraction from the hollow ache of loss. He crossed paths again with Triss Merigold, the kind-hearted sorceress who had once been Yennefer's friend. She mended his wounds and for a time warmed the cold space Yennefer had left behind. But even Triss knew the truth, that she was a shelter, not a home. Geralt's heart, though weary, had already chosen its ruin. Elsewhere, Yennefer navigated another kind of battlefield, the tangled web of politics and power. She fought not with blades, but with wit and will, moving through the courts of kings and councils of mages. Always seeking Ciri, always reaching for control in a world unraveling. To some, she was manipulative. To others, she was the only one brave enough to do what needed to be done. Beneath every calculated spell and poised word was a single unspoken fear, that she would never see her daughter again. Their paths crossed rarely, and when they did, it was like standing too close to lightning, beautiful, dangerous, impossible to hold. Sometimes they fought, sometimes they simply stood in silence, both too proud to speak the apologies neither could say. And yet, destiny kept tugging at the loose threads between them. Geralt found traces of Ciri, rumors whispered by peasants, a name written in sand, a trail of strange magic that only Yennefer would recognize. She followed his path as he followed hers, both always arriving just too late. Meanwhile, the line between monster and man blurred further. Geralt hunted beasts born of hate and found men more monstrous than the creatures they feared. Yennefer watched mages burn one another for power, for ideology, for love gone sour. Each learned again that the true monsters were rarely the ones with claws. When they did meet once more, it was during the chaos of another war. The air smelled of ash and endings. They stood together for a moment too long, two survivors of a love too fierce for the world around them. Still alive, Geralt said quietly, as though it were a surprise. For now, Yennefer replied, we're too stubborn to die. And she was right. Because no matter what the world took, Ciri, peacetime, it could never quite kill the thread that bound them. Fragile, frayed, invisible, but unbroken. They would find Ciri again. They had to. For in a world devoured by monsters and men alike, love, in all its chaos, was the only thing worth chasing. Last wish reclaimed. War had torn the continent open, but even amid the ruin, destiny worked in quiet patterns, drawing old souls back together when the world seemed least likely to allow it. Geralt awoke one morning with memories that weren't supposed to exist. Fragments of a woman's laughter, the scent of lilac and gooseberries, a voice calling his name through the fog of his mind. Yennefer. The memory of her, long buried beneath amnesia and magic, came rushing back like a tide that refused to stay gone. He searched for her as he once hunted monsters, with relentless purpose, guided by nothing more than instinct and the ache that had never truly healed. Across burning fields and broken villages, he followed rumors of a raven-haired sorceress seen at court, of a woman who walked through battlefields untouched, her violet gaze commanding storms. Each whisper led him closer. Each mile peeled away the years between them. When they met again, it was not in joy but exhaustion. The world was collapsing, the northern kingdoms in ruins, Nilfgaard rising, and Ciri lost somewhere between dimensions. Yet when Yennefer saw him, something softened, just for a heartbeat. All her years of control, her armor of power and pride. They cracked at the sight of him still breathing, still looking at her as if nothing could unmake what they once were. "You found me," she said quietly. "I always do," he replied. It was not the first time they had been reunited, and not the first time they had broken each other, but this time was different. There was no storm of anger or seduction, no battle of wills. Just two souls too tired to pretend they were anything but the same. Two halves of a spell that never stopped humming, even after the magic faded. Together, they searched for Ciri, the daughter they had lost to prophecy and chaos. Their path carried them through the ruins of Temeria, through deserts that sang with death, through battlefields where kings and monsters shared the same graves. And along the way, the question that had haunted them both, the question of the Jinn's wish, returned once more. Geralt remembered his words in Rind, that desperate plea to save her life, a wish that had tied them together in ways neither could understand. For years, they had feared that their love was only magic's residue, that their bond was born not of choice, but of compulsion. But now, standing amid a dying world, the answer revealed itself without words. Because when Yennefer nearly gave her life to save Ciri, when she poured out every last ember of her magic to protect the girl from the wild hunt, there was no Jinn's will guiding her. There was only love. Geralt found her after, broken and breathless, lying in the ashes of her spell. He gathered her in his arms, the way he had all those years ago in Rind, and whispered her name as though it were a prayer. "Yen." She smiled faintly, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "You always come for me," she said. "Always," he answered, "even when I shouldn't." Her laugh was soft, a ghost of the woman she'd been, but real. "Then maybe this is our last wish, Geralt," she murmured. "Not the Jinn's. Ours." And perhaps it was. For what they had reclaimed was not magic or destiny, but choice, the fragile mortal kind that burns brighter for being finite. In the end, love did not save the world. It rarely does. But in the small space between wars and losses, Geralt and Yennefer found something worth more than peace. Each other, freely chosen. The Jinn's spell was long broken, but the wish endured. Not in magic, but in memory, in the way they still reached for one another when the world went dark. For the first time, their love belonged entirely to them. The roads we take. The world did not end when they expected it to. It simply changed shape. Wars quieted into uneasy treaties. Thrones crumbled and were rebuilt by bloodied hands. Yet for Geralt and Yennefer, the battles never truly ceased. For a time, there was peace, the fragile kind that comes after great storms. They wandered the continent together, sometimes with Ciri at their side, sometimes chasing her fading shadow. The girl, grown fierce and untamed, had become her own legend, her own destiny. The White Wolf and the sorceress of Vengerberg had raised her to stand alone, and now they had to learn what it meant to let her go. Geralt, ever the wanderer, returned to the path. He hunted monsters again, for coin, for habit, perhaps for the illusion that life could still make sense. But every village, every contract, every lonely inn seemed haunted by her absence. By their absences, Ciri's laughter, Yennefer's quiet rebukes, the warmth that never stayed long enough. He met Triss again in Novigrad, her kindness still soft, her eyes still full of what could have been. For a heartbeat, he thought of choosing the easier road, one paved with gentleness instead of fire. But gentleness was not love, not for him. Yennefer was the scar that had shaped his heart, beautiful, painful, irreplaceable. Yennefer, meanwhile, moved through courts and chaos with her familiar blend of poise and peril. To kings and mages, she remained the same, cold, calculating, untouchable. But in her quiet moments, when the mirrors of her chamber showed no one else, she would whisper his name as though it summoned warmth to her bones. For all her power, the only magic she could never master was forgetting him. Sometimes they found each other again, on the road, never planned, always inevitable. A village half burned, a tavern half full, the air thick with rain and memory. He would walk in, and she would look up, and the world would tilt back into place. They never needed grand words. A shared glance, a faint smile, these were their confessions now. They had been young once, proud and reckless, mistaking passion for permanence. Now older, tempered by loss and survival, their love was quieter, but truer. One night, beneath a sky heavy with stars, Yennefer asked, "Do you ever think about what might have been if there'd been no magic between us?" Geralt took a long breath. "Every day," he said, and he smiled faintly. "I think I'd still have found you." She laughed, that low silver sound that always undid him. "You stubborn fool." "Yours," he said simply. The roads they took always led them apart, and somehow always back again. That was the curse and grace of their lives, to never stay, but never truly leave. And somewhere in another land, Ciri carried their memory with her mother's fire, her father's quiet strength. As she rode through worlds unseen, the echo of their love following her like a song. Because destiny, once cruel and binding, had softened into something gentler, a choice. And every road they took, whether toward each other or away, was still part of the same story, the same circle of chaos and magic, love and loss. For such was the nature of witchers and sorceresses. They were never meant for peace, only for finding each other, again and again, across the wreckage of the world. In Avalon's quiet, the tale of the White Wolf and the sorceress of Vengerberg did not end in triumph. It ended, as all mortal stories do, in quiet inevitability. After the wars, after Ciri vanished into legend, through portals and time, beyond even destiny's grasp, Geralt and Yennefer found themselves adrift. There were no more monsters to slay that could silence the ache of memory, no spells left to cast that could undo the years they had lost. The continents still bled, still whispered their names like myth, but for them, the song was fading. They settled by a lake once, in a village untouched by power or politics. The people there knew Geralt only as the white-haired man who fixed roofs and carried too much sorrow in his eyes. Yennefer, dressed in black and violet, was his quiet mystery, tending herbs, reading beneath the willow trees, her laughter rare but real. For a fleeting moment, peace became possible. But peace, like magic, always demands its price. One day, a mob came, frightened peasants, twisted by rumor and fear of witchers. They called him a monster, accused her of bewitching their children. Words turned to weapons, and the world, once again, turned cruel. Geralt stood his ground, blade drawn not for coin, but for love. He fell protecting a stranger. Yennefer found him dying on the lake shore. Her magic, once capable of summoning storms and shattering kingdoms, could not hold his life together. She tried anyway, every spell, every ounce of strength, until her hands shook and her body broke. Her power burned out with her tears, and as she collapsed beside him, her final breath met his. Ciri returned too late. She found them there, side by side, hands still intertwined, faces calm as if in sleep. She wept not with rage, but with understanding. They had never belonged to this world, not truly. They had lived through destiny and defied it. Perhaps now they were free of it. So she carried them, through portal and dream, to a place beyond swords and sorrow, to the Isle of Avalon where mists cradle eternity and no war dares to reach. There, beneath an apple tree, she laid them to rest. Some say she saw them stir, saw their eyes open for a moment, filled with quiet wonder, before she vanished into the worlds again. And perhaps in that place beyond time, they woke together, no monsters, no politics, no destiny. Only a sunrise, a still lake, and the faint laughter of a woman teasing a witcher who had finally learned how to rest. For in Avalon's quiet, love was no longer curse or chaos, only promise, and thus ends the lovelore of Geralt and Yennefer. A love that began in a wish, endured through war, and found its peace not in life, but in forever. Our Quiet Apocalypse, a Lovelore of Ellie and Dina, a narration drawn from The Last of Us Part 2, a story told in the language of loss, where love became both refuge and ruin, and peace was the last thing left to lose. What we keep after fire. The world had quieted, not in peace, but in the heavy stillness that follows a storm. Jackson lay beneath a thin veil of snow, its rooftops glinting pale beneath the winter sun. The air smelled faintly of smoke and pine, of hearths lit against the cold, of lives rebuilt on ash and memory. Ellie walked the streets, boots crunching against frost-hardened ground, and felt the weight of what she could not undo pressing against her chest. Joel's absence was a constant pulse, a rhythm in the empty spaces of her days. His choices, the fire he lit and the lives he saved at a cost no one could forgive, haunted her as clearly as any ghost. She carried it all, love, guilt, fear, and the unspoken truth that the world had never asked permission for anyone to survive. She had survived, but surviving carried its own punishment. It was here, amid quiet streets and children laughing in snow-laden yards, that Dina appeared, bright-eyed, mischievous, warm, alive. She had a way of moving through the world as if danger were only a story told by those too afraid to live. She laughed freely, even when bullets and memories clawed at the edges of the town. Ellie first noticed her in the marketplace, reaching for apples in the frozen morning light. Their eyes met, and in that glance, something soft and unspoken sparked. Curiosity, recognition, a tether to a life that could still be tender. Days passed in routines stitched together by patrols, chores, and small kindnesses. Ellie found herself lingering in moments with Dina, a shared joke, a glance that lasted too long, a hand brushing against hers while carrying firewood. Each encounter was a delicate balancing act. The world outside was harsh, unforgiving, ready to punish any lapse of vigilance. Yet in these fleeting interactions, warmth blossomed. Music entered their lives as if summoned by fate itself. Joel's guitar, still carefully kept in its case, became a vessel for memory and connection. Ellie would play softly in the evenings, her fingers tracing the worn strings, teaching herself to breathe through the songs he had taught her. Dina would hum along, hesitant at first, then with ease, her voice weaving through the cracks in Ellie's heart. For a moment, the past did not ache, the violence did not cool, and love, fragile and new, took its first breath. Yet even as snow fell over Jackson and laughter filled corners of the town, Ellie could not escape what she carried. Every fire she lit reminded her of what had burned before. Every song reminded her of Joel's absence. Every smile of the weight of survival. She learned quickly that love in a ruined world was not a shelter from sorrow. It was something to hold against the wind, a fragile flame she could neither extinguish nor fully protect. And so, in the quiet aftermath of fire and lies, Ellie and Dina began, slowly, tremblingly, defiantly, to build a world worth keeping. One shared glance, one gentle touch, one soft note at a time. In these small acts, love found a foothold, daring to exist even when everything else had fallen. Nights made of snow and song. Snow fell in thick, lazy layers over Jackson, covering rooftops, fences, and the worn paths Ellie and Dina walked together. The town glowed in quiet warmth, lanterns flickering against the white, casting long, soft shadows over the streets. Each flake that landed felt like a note in a fragile song, a reminder that life could still exist beyond survival, that warmth could exist beyond grief. Ellie followed Dina across the frozen square, boots scuffing the icy ground. Their laughter broke through the cold like sunlight through clouds. Small, intimate bursts of joy that made the frost in Ellie's chest melt for the briefest moments. She watched Dina's hair catch the streetlight, dark and wild, strands moving like smoke in the wind. And for a heartbeat, the weight of vengeance, of guilt, of Joel's death, seemed to lift. They arrived at the community hall, where lights strung from the rafters swayed gently above families dancing and sharing meals. Ellie hesitated at the doorway, her pulse erratic. The world outside demanded wariness, but here in this haven, the rules were different. Dina's hand brushed against hers, small and grounding. That touch was a promise, unspoken but clear, you are not alone. As the evening stretched, Ellie learned the rhythm of living again. Music swelled from a battered piano in the corner. Children laughed in clusters, oblivious to the past. And when a familiar tune drifted from a guitar someone strummed carelessly in the corner, Ellie's fingers twitched with memory. Joel's lessons, his voice, the songs that had once been hers alone. Dina nudged her, eyes bright with mischief. "Go on," she whispered, and in that single word, Ellie felt courage bloom. She pulled her guitar from its case, fingers brushing the strings carefully, tentatively. Then the notes came, trembling at first, unsure, but finding strength as her song unfolded. Dina hummed softly, then more confidently, their voices mingling in warmth, weaving a fragile net against the cold outside. The night became a world of its own, snow falling beyond frosted windows, laughter and music inside, two hearts finding each other in spaces where the world's cruelty could not reach. Each smile, each shared glance, each note in their song was a rebellion against everything that had been taken from them. Later, as the hall emptied, Ellie and Dina walked back through the snow-dusted streets. Boots crunching, breath misting in the air, hands finding each other naturally, intuitively. Ellie felt something unfamiliar, hope maybe, or something close to it. A quiet warmth beneath the ache of everything she had endured. And when they reached the small cabin they shared for these nights of reprieve, Ellie leaned against the doorway, eyes on Dina's profile in the soft lantern glow. "You make it easier," she said, voice low. Dina smiled, a small gentle tilt of her head, and replied, "We make it together." The snow continued to fall, muffling the world. And in that quiet, brief as it was, Ellie let herself imagine a tomorrow that could be lighter, a world that might, just for a moment, belong to them both. Vengeance wears his face. The world turned suddenly dark. Joel was gone, taken violently without warning, leaving a hollow ache that swallowed Ellie whole. The morning had seemed ordinary, snow still lingering, townspeople moving with quiet purpose, life carrying on despite the ghosts of the past. Then Abby appeared, and everything Ellie had built, every fragile piece of peace, shattered into jagged fragments. Grief struck first, raw, untamed, relentless. Her hands shook as she traced the walls of her cabin, touched the objects Joel had once held, the guitar, the worn jacket, the faded photos. And with grief came anger, white-hot, consuming, demanding retribution. Vengeance was no longer abstract. It wore Joel's face. Every thought, every heartbeat, became a drumbeat of fury, echoing across her mind. Dina tried to hold her back, tried to remind her of the warmth they had found, of the fragile life waiting in Jackson, of the baby growing beneath her heart. But Ellie could not hear. All she could see was the world as a map of blood and justice, each step leading to Abby, each breath a preparation for the reckoning she could not avoid. They moved through snow-covered streets, past homes still alive with laughter, past children playing in ignorance of the world's cruelty. Each footstep was heavy, each glance toward Dina a battle between love and obsession. She wanted to reach out, to clutch her hand, to anchor herself to something human, but vengeance demanded more. Love could wait. Life could wait. Nothing mattered but the weight of justice, the echoes of Joel's final moments, and the fire building in her chest. Their journey towards Seattle was a pilgrimage through a world already crumbling. Boarded up stores, overturned cars, alleys littered with the remnants of what humanity had left behind, all reflected the chaos within her. Dina stayed beside her, persistent, patient, sometimes pleading, sometimes laughing softly to remind Ellie that she could still breathe. But even Dina's light could not fully reach the shadow rising inside Ellie. Every confrontation became a reflection of her pain. Strangers, enemies, remnants of the world's collapse. They were all standing in for Abby, all reminders of the injustice that had taken everything she held dear. And yet, even amid the rage, Ellie felt moments of tension, a lingering glance at Dina, a hand brushing against hers, a shared breath in the freezing air. These small gestures tethered her to life, though she could not yet accept them fully. By the time they reached the outskirts of Seattle, the snow was replaced by rain and ruin. Broken streets, shattered vehicles, abandoned buildings, a city decaying like the world itself. Ellie's hands tightened on her weapons, her eyes cold with determination. Vengeance was no longer abstract. It was concrete, unavoidable, a force she had become. And yet, somewhere deep, buried beneath fury and grief, a part of her still remembered the warmth, the laughter, the nights of snow and song. Dina stayed close, unwavering, knowing that the path ahead was perilous, that the person Ellie was about to become might leave them both broken. But love, fragile as it was, persisted. And in that persistence lay the faintest hope, that even when vengeance wears his face, there remains the possibility of return, of mercy, of tomorrow. Songs between gunfire. Seattle was a city broken and bleeding, a landscape of concrete, rain, and ruin. Every street was a testament to survival, every alleyway a memory of battles fought and lives lost. Ellie and Dina moved through the remnants carefully, boots silent on cracked pavement, eyes sharp against the shadows. It was a world that had forgotten mercy, yet in its decay, they sought moments that still felt human. They found it in an abandoned theater, curtains torn, seats coated in dust, a stage cracked and splintered. Here, amid decay, they carved out a fragile sanctuary. The space smelled of mildew and old wood, yet it was theirs, if only for a moment. Ellie set down her pack, fingers brushing the worn guitar case she carried like a talisman, and Dina traced the edges of a stage, smiling softly at the improbable beauty of it all. Night fell, and rain tapped against broken windows, a rhythm that merged with the pounding of their hearts. Ellie strummed carefully at first, the notes tentative, fragile, uncertain. But as Dina hummed along, laughter breaking through the tension, the music grew stronger, resonating against the walls, filling the hollow theater with life once thought impossible. Between firefights and the constant threat outside, they found moments of intimacy, quiet laughter over shared warmth, the brush of hands, a lingering gaze. Each gesture was a rebellion against the world's cruelty, a promise that even amid ruin, they could create spaces of tenderness. Yet danger never truly left them. Each day brought encounters with infected, patrols by hostile humans, and the reminders of the vengeance that had driven them into this city. Every step carried the weight of choices made, lives taken, and the morality frayed by survival. Ellie's anger, once a burning flame, now simmered beneath every movement, every glance at Dina, every decision that balanced survival against their fragile hope. And still, the music persisted. Even after bullets shattered windows, even when footsteps echoed against empty halls, Ellie played. Dina's voice rose in harmony, soft and steady, threading warmth through the cold. It was in these small acts, a song strummed, a note hummed, that they remembered why they fought to survive, why love mattered, why human connection endured. When dawn finally broke, pale and gray, they stepped outside, water dripping from rooftops, streets slick with rain. Ellie's fingers lingered on the guitar strings, the notes fading into the mist, and Dina's hand found hers, strong and grounding. For a moment, the chaos outside did not exist. Only the rhythm of shared breaths, shared hearts, and shared defiance. In a city of ruin, where every corner threatened to devour them, Ellie and Dina discovered something imperishable: music, love, and the courage to keep creating moments of humanity between the violence. And in that fragile sanctuary, they dared to imagine a future together, one song, one laugh, one touch at a time. Hearth in the Hollow. After weeks navigating the flooded, crumbling streets of Seattle, Ellie and Dina returned to Jackson, carrying exhaustion, wounds, and memories heavy as stone. The snow had melted into mud, streams of gray water winding through the town, but the village itself breathed a quiet rhythm, small, human, stubborn. For a brief moment, it felt possible to breathe, to rest, to reclaim something that had been lost to fire and vengeance. They settled into a small farmhouse at the edge of town, a structure forgotten by most but welcoming in its crooked walls and chipped paint. Inside, the scent of wood smoke and damp earth filled the rooms, mingling with warmth from a hearth that crackled and popped under a steady hand. Ellie unpacked her pack slowly, lingering on familiar items: Joel's guitar, a few scattered notebooks, and a photograph pressed into a corner of her mind. Each object was a bridge to memory, both comforting and painfully sharp. Dina moved through the rooms with practiced ease, carrying firewood, humming softly, her presence gentle yet steady. Ellie watched her, realizing in fragments what it meant to have someone beside her, to share the weight of living, of surviving, without constantly calculating the cost of touch or word. Here in this hollowed house, love had room to breathe, to grow, to mend. Days unfolded in a rhythm both ordinary and extraordinary. Ellie tended to small repairs, cleared the snowmelt from the yard, and watched Dina cradle her growing belly with a tenderness that stirred something she had thought dormant. Laughter returned in quiet bursts, the sound of music blending with chores, songs strummed softly in the evenings as the sun set over mud-slicked fields. For a time, the world outside seemed distant, the weight of vengeance momentarily held at bay. Yet even within this fragile haven, the past pressed in like wind against the windows. Joel's memory lingered in corners, a silent echo of everything they had lost and everything that could never be undone. Ellie's hands sometimes shook as she reached for the guitar, her fingers brushing the strings in a half-forgotten rhythm. Nights brought dreams of blood and rain, of choices made and unmade, of Abby's face and the fury that had once consumed her. Still, in those moments, she remembered why she fought to survive, not just for vengeance, but for the chance to love, to nurture, to exist alongside someone who chose her as she chose them. Dina's touch, the curve of her smile, the quiet confidence in her presence. These were anchors, soft but unyielding, against the storm of memory and grief. Ellie learned slowly that peace was not a gift freely given. It was carved in moments of tenderness, defended in silence, sustained in laughter, and held fiercely against the encroaching chaos. The farmhouse became their hearth, hollow though it was, a place where love persisted despite the scars the world had left behind. And as night fell over Jackson, the first stars appearing in icy skies, Ellie and Dina sat together near the fire, hands intertwined, listening to the crackle and pop of warmth. Here, for a brief, fleeting moment, they allowed themselves to hope that even amid ruin, life could be tender and love could endure. Ghosts beneath her skin. The farmhouse was quiet, but quiet was no longer enough. Ellie lay awake beneath the low beams, the moonlight casting silver across the floorboards, and felt the weight of the past settle deep beneath her skin. Joel's face, Abby's vengeance, every life she had taken, they pressed against her consciousness, relentless and inescapable. Even love, once a refuge, now felt fragile, threatened by the tides of memory and rage that ebbed and flowed within her. Dina stirred beside her, warmth brushing against her shoulder, hand resting lightly on her belly, a heartbeat beneath skin. Ellie felt the pull to stay, to cradle what they had built, to remain in the hollowed safety of their hearth. Yet the shadows in her mind whispered in sharper tones, unfinished business, debts unpaid, a world that demanded blood before forgiveness. And so, in the dead of night, Ellie rose, pulling her coat close, the guitar slung across her back like a shield. She did not look back. The soft weight of Dina's presence lingered in her memory, the curve of her smile, the gentle hum of laughter, the small, steady breaths in sleep. But vengeance was calling louder than love, and Ellie followed it, step by step, into the rain-slick streets beyond Jackson. Every movement was deliberate, every thought a calculation of survival and purpose. Yet beneath her armor, she carried the echo of tenderness, the faint warmth of what she had abandoned. Along the way, memories of Seattle's ruins intertwined with visions of Joel's death. The streets, soaked in rain and blood, played back in fragments. Abby's determined face, the violence that shattered everything, the helplessness of friends and strangers alike. And yet, amid the storm of grief, Ellie's focus narrowed to a single point, the reckoning she could not avoid, the confrontation that defined her path. Dina's voice haunted her in flashes, soft and pleading, as if carried by the wind through Jackson's empty streets. "Come back," it seemed to say. But Ellie pressed onward, determined, knowing that returning now would mean betraying the force that had consumed her for months. She walked into the storm of her own making, hands gripping weapons, heart tethered to a fragile memory she feared she might never reclaim. Even as the rain soaked through her jacket, even as exhaustion clawed at her muscles, Ellie felt the ghost of her former warmth and tenderness beneath her skin. The music, the laughter, the small moments with Dina, they were fragile embers, dim but not extinguished. And somewhere in that ember, a promise lingered, that she could return, that love could survive even when vengeance demanded the first claim. Yet in this moment, she allowed herself only one truth. Survival was imperative. justice was necessary, and she had no choice but to leave the hearth behind. Every step carried the weight of loss, every breath the taste of grief. The world beyond Jackson waited, a city of ruin and chaos, and Ellie walked into it alone, leaving behind warmth, home, and love. Salt on the wind. Sunlight fractured over the horizon, spilling into Santa Barbara like molten gold, but the city it touched was a ruin, battered by time, neglect, and humanity's relentless cruelty. Ellie's boots scuffed against cracked pavement, her breath forming small clouds in the cool morning air, each step measured, deliberate, every heartbeat echoing the fury and grief she had carried across Jackson and Seattle. Abby was here somewhere, and every sight, every sound, every scent in the salt-tinged air reminded Ellie of what had been taken. Joel's warmth, the fragile peace with Dina, the laughter of days before vengeance claimed her soul. She moved silently, weapons ready, senses tuned to the rhythm of survival, but also to the fragile thread of mercy she had not yet considered. The confrontation came swift and violent, as inevitable as the tide rolling in from the shore. Abby, bruised but resolute, met Ellie's gaze with unflinching eyes, a mirror of the fury that had driven them both through months of blood and ruin. Every strike, every block, every clash of their bodies was a language older than words, a dialogue of grief, rage, and the haunting residue of what the world had demanded of them. Ellie's fury burned like fire beneath her skin, threatening to consume her as it had before. Yet as she raised her weapon, poised to deliver final judgment, something shifted. Abby's exhaustion, her desperation, her brokenness reflected the same path Ellie had walked. In her eyes, Ellie saw fragments of herself, of the girl who had loved, who had lost, who had been forced to survive at any cost. Salt from the ocean clung to the air, carried on wind that lifted strands of wet hair from their faces, and in that charged, fractured moment, Ellie made a choice she could scarcely imagine. She let Abby go, stepping back, lowering her weapon, feeling the tide sweep over the world's cruelty. Mercy was not weakness, it was a reclaiming of herself, a refusal to let vengeance define the limits of her life. In that pause, the storm of grief and rage began to loosen its grip. Ellie tasted freedom in the air, not absolute, not without pain, but present, real, fragile. She breathed, lungs filling with salt and wind, and understood that forgiveness, like love, was something she had to allow herself, something that could exist even when the world demanded destruction. Dina's absence loomed, yet Ellie felt her presence in memory. Soft warmth, gentle strength, the pulse of life she had carried within her hands. The choice to spare Abby was also a choice for love, for hope, for a chance to return to the hearth she had abandoned. Even if she could not reach it now, she had planted the seed of mercy, a fragile promise that could survive even in the ruins. As waves lapped against the fractured pier, Ellie turned away, letting the wind carry away the weight she had borne for months. Salt clung to her skin, sun warmed her shoulders, and in that quiet, fractured moment, she glimpsed what had been missing all along, that survival was not only measured in vengeance, but in the courage to spare, to release, and eventually to return. After everything, silence. Ellie returned to the farmhouse with the sun low over the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and golds. The air smelled of rain-soaked earth, smoke from distant chimneys, and the faint lingering scent of what had once been home. But when she reached the door, the weight in her chest warned her. Something was missing, and she already knew what. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The hearth still glowed faintly from hours before, but the warmth was hollow. Dina's laughter, once a constant undercurrent, was absent. JJ's small footprints no longer marked the floor. Everything that had been fragile, beautiful, and defiant against the world's cruelty was gone, leaving only the echo of memories Ellie could no longer touch. She walked through the room slowly, fingers brushing the worn wood of tables, chairs, and counters. Each touch carried a whisper of the life they had tried to build together. Meals shared, songs hummed, blankets tucked tight over sleepy shoulders. And yet, all of it existed now only in her mind, a ghostly archive of tenderness and loss. Ellie's hands found Joel's guitar, leaning against the wall where she had left it, strings dulled but intact. She picked it up, feeling its familiar weight, and strummed a soft, tentative chord. The note lingered in the empty room, quivering like the fragile heartbeat of memory itself. Her fingers moved over the strings, cracked and aching, coaxing out the song she had learned long ago, a song of love, of grief, of survival. Tears slipped down her cheeks, warm against the cold air of the farmhouse. She remembered Joel, Dina, Abby, the blood and rain, the laughter and the music. Every choice, every loss, every heartbeat that had led her here. And she understood, in a way she could not before, that life had not ended with vengeance or absence. It had persisted, quietly, patiently, in the spaces she could still reach. Ellie set the guitar down gently, fingers lingering on the worn wood, and stepped outside. The world stretched before her, muddy paths, snow-tipped trees, distant mountains fading into twilight. She breathed, deep and deliberate, feeling the wind carry away the remnants of anger, grief, and rage. And somewhere beyond the horizon, perhaps even beyond the storm of her own making, there was a chance for mercy, for forgiveness, for beginnings she could not yet imagine. She walked forward, boots sinking slightly in the soft earth, shoulders heavy yet unbroken, carrying the fragments of love, loss, and life with her. Behind her, the farmhouse stood silent, a monument to what had been built and what had been lost. But within her, a quiet flame endured, soft yet stubborn, carrying the music, the laughter, and the love she had once known. And as night fell, settling across Jackson in violet shadows and starry light, Ellie's footsteps disappeared down the road. Silence followed, yes, but not emptiness. There was memory, there was endurance, there was hope. Fragile, yes, but alive. And in that quiet, she understood the truth she had been chasing all along. Love, like music, like mercy, persists, even after everything.